Hi, everybody.
So you are working at the Museum of Modern Art. You're associate curator at the Department of Drawing and Prints.
Yes.
So the audience is yours.
All right. And you are mine for the next 25 minutes. I just want to first reiterate my thanks to Jan for organizing this phenomenal couple of days. It's been really fantastic. And to my co-panelists this morning who've really given me a very tough act to follow. So thanks, guys. And I look forward to the conversation we'll have here afterwards. So to some, the contemporary print world seems to be sited on the periphery of the global art landscape, where we proponents of printmaking endlessly attempt to counter the misconception that a print is not an original work of art, or outline the differences between a print and a poster, or explain how an etching is made. Within some quarters, this state of affairs may contribute to the sense that the print world is somehow perennially on the verge of obsolescence, fighting for relevancy in a fast-paced, multifaceted, market-driven, international arena that seems to have neither time nor patience for a description of waterless lithography's merits. It's true that printed art has trajectories and histories that both align with and deviate from the arc of the history of art. And as print scholars, it's our responsibility to protect and preserve those specific legacies. But rather than seeing this as a moribund effort, I would argue that printmaking is currently experiencing something of a stealth renaissance, finding ways of insinuating itself into the larger activities of contemporary art without necessarily announcing itself as doing so. The conceptual concerns of these mediums and their things we've talked about at length over the last couple of days, collaboration, process, the idea of multiplicity, of copy and original, of reproduction, of sequence and seriality. These things are wholly present in work across disciplines, resulting in exciting new projects, both print, and I'm using that term here to mean made and distributed within the realm of the print world, its publishers, printers, and dealers, and printed projects, incorporating tools or aspects of printmaking, but with a broader kind of non-print specific purview. Unquestionably, traditional printmaking, and by here I mean the production of editioned woodcuts and lithographs and screen prints and intaglios and digital prints, is alive and well. In New York, the annual IFPDA fair, coming up next month, every November, has expanded to encompass not only a fair of nearly 100 international print dealers, but also a full print week of openings, exhibitions, and gallery talks around the city, and a revitalized EAB, or Artist Editions Book Fair, which you see on the bottom right there in Chelsea, at which all the booths are devoted to contemporary prints, books, and multiples. And just last night in New York, the Art Book Fair opened at MoMA PS1. In just a couple of years, this has gone from a kind of fly by the seat of one's pants organization to a really sprawling event that takes over 2.5 floors of an entire school building. So artists are really involved still in the production of prints, artist books, and zines. Artists who are considered among the great printmakers of our last decades continue to work in their preferred mediums. Boslitz in linoleum cut and woodcut, Kiki Smith in intaglio, Jasper Johns in lithography. And I think the desire to brand these artists as printmakers in a way may be an effort to validate the continuing relevance of these centuries-old techniques, or also just the natural impulse of curators and art historians to want to categorize and classify, to assign labels to things. But perhaps an even more compelling justification for printmaking is to consider how print-related but not print-specific activities feed back into many aspects of artist practices. The history of art, as we've seen, again, over the last couple of days, reveals many artists not necessarily identified as printmakers who incorporate print into their work. And just in recent memory, we have to start with Andy Warhol, who was really essential in embracing the porosity between mediums. In an introductory essay for the catalog raisonné of Warhol's prints, Arthur Danto enumerates what he calls Warhol's conceptual erasures. So eliding the distinction between print and printed. the distinction between art object and usable object, the adoption of the Xerox machine, which is, of course, a means of making a reproduction as a means of making originals. Issuing editions that consisted, in fact, of unique variants, producing works at the same time with the same techniques, but classifying them variably as either prints or paintings. And the Cagney that you see on the screen here is one great example. In the first edition of the Warhol print raisonné, it was not included. It was considered at that time by Warhol to be a painting. In the subsequent edition, it was included as a screen print. Christopher Wohl is an artist who follows in Warhol's path as someone whose work is suffused with the visual language, the technical processes, and the conceptual concerns of printmaking. It's present in the stencil-style lettering of his word paintings and the stamped repeating patterns of his wallpaper-like pictures, which you see on the right, with more recent works built of multiple printed and painted layers. Wohl also uses print to create a sense of distance from the autographic mark, digitally manipulating painted strokes, or transforming them into printed strata via photographic screens, introducing steps to make the artist's hand an instrument of mechanical reproduction. And as Warhol did, he allows for the accidents and the inherent vice of these mediums. For screen print, ink pressed unevenly through the warp and weft of reused screens, becoming increasingly clogged. He allows those accidents to dictate the final image and uses a medium designed for reproduction, screen print, in the creation of the singular image. But just as an aside, it's not exclusively in the creation of the singular image. In this recent series of works made at ULAE on Long Island, the editioned lithograph, which you see on the left, was translated into photogravure, scaled down, and then became the printed background layer for the unique monotype on the right. And the monotype is one of a series in which that printed background layer is used. This kind of approach can be seen with even greater prevalence among a current generation of artists for whom medium-specific assignations just don't hold that much significance. And this is something Susan talked about yesterday. For many, the techniques of printmaking, whether digital or lithographic, are naturally part of a larger palette of practice, and they don't necessarily call their end results prints or edition them as such. Wade Guyton and Kelly Walker, who sometimes worked collaboratively as Guyton Walker, connect back to Warhol's conceptual erasures as they embrace the use of printed techniques and printed supports across their work, though often substituting the 21st century digital equivalent for Warhol's 60s era Xerox machine. Guyton's unique inkjets are printed on canvas or plywood using a typographic vocabulary of X's or U's that he grabs from Microsoft Word, while Walker's digital works are often accompanied by digital files that allow the image to be printed at any scale that the owner desires, so that the duplication aspect of printmaking occurs after the work has left the artist's control. While these digital works rely on print, as do the artist's collaborative prints on magazine pages and advertisements, they're more likely to be positioned as paintings or drawings than as prints. This kind of malleability of medium is reflected in how the works are collected. At MoMA, works by Guyton and Walker using the exact same techniques have been designated as 3 separate classifications: as print, as drawing, and as sculpture. That's the sculpture that you see there. Rikrit Tirvenit's practice revolves around participation and experience through the creation of shared social spaces, collaborative activities, and perhaps most uniquely for him, shared meals. Beginning in the early 90s, his exhibitions and installations have often taken the form of communal kitchens or canteens, where the artist and his collaborators cook meals with and for gallery visitors. But how do you experience Rikrit's work if you don't happen to be in Argentina on the one day that he's grilling barbecue, or outside the Messeplatz at Art Basel where he was cooking this year? The answer has been constant, and that's the tangible product of Rikrit's practice has been the ongoing production of editions and multiples that help to capture and even recreate the spirit of such events. The traveling edition, which you see here on the left, forms a kind of archive of some of these shared meals. It's a cookbook as catalog, accompanied by a chef's knife. Well, that's actually like a giant cleaver, and an apron. And each of the cleavers and the aprons was sourced individually. And the apron is then screen printed with a great phrase, and that is, letting things burn and cook and boil, that's great. And the edition invites us to be the creators of our own shared meals, to regenerate these experiences, further spreading the artist's ideas. Just a couple of other examples. A 1993 multiple on the left comprised a recipe for pork sausage and a paper apron bearing a transferred image of a sausage, which of course you are meant to wear while you are preparing the sausage, which you then share with someone else. On the right, Lunchbox from 1996 is a stacked stainless steel tiffin box, and it comes to you empty, but with the instruction that once you acquire it, you should send it to a local Thai place, and they are to fill it with a specific menu. The menu is pork satay, green papaya salad, yellow chicken curry, and rice. Comes with a newspaper, so you can sit down and enjoy this lunch and read the newspaper as perhaps thousands of well, in this case, say Thai people, are doing at the exact same moment, creating this kind of resonance across time and geography. A recent residency at the Leroy Neiman Center for Print Studies at Columbia University in New York has resulted in a number of printed projects, and he's getting more interested now in more kind of traditional printmaking processes. One of them is this monumental 3-part scroll, and it's this kind of visual autobiography unfurled over the course of these 3 sheets. And you can see this kind of purple spine that runs through the images. That's the artist's passport. Rickert is a Thai. He was born in Argentina, and he essentially spends his life on the road. So the passport is the size of a small telephone directory, full of visas and amendments, and it becomes the kind of backbone for his own autobiography here. Printmaking's specific visual languages have also been absorbed across mediums, including in video and moving image projects, as is the case with the Japanese artist Tabaimo. Often evoking great topics like violence, sex, death, discomfort, and delight, she draws on both the aesthetics of traditional 18th century Japanese ukiyo-e woodcuts and on the sometimes absurd narratives and blatant violence of another printed format, and that's Japanese manga comics. Like her historical predecessors, Hokusai and Hiroshige, Tabaimo sets her work in the contemporary world, describing everyday life and pastimes with a characteristic perspectival flatness. She mimics the palettes of these masters by actually scanning ukiyo-e prints and then using Photoshop to capture and sample their colors to be able to reapply that palette to her own work. She also has embraced the traditional cast of characters from folklore, mythology, and erotica, depicting surreal ghosts, monsters, and hybrid creatures with a forthright approach to social and sexual mores. Men's Bathhouse depicts an amorous sumo embrace, espied by this kind of phallic turtle in the background, inside the quotidian setting of the neighborhood sento, or bathhouse, with Hokusai's memorable depiction of Mount Fuji in eruption now perhaps being read slightly differently, in the background. The work is, in essence, a printed still from one of her videos, but it looks and acts like an ukiyo-e woodcut. And only more recently has she begun to explore printed formats in earnest, working now in lithography, woodcut, and etching. The Shanghai-based artist Chu Anshong likewise works primarily in video, but found a really compelling conceptual reason to turn to traditional woodcut. His new classic of Mountains and Seas, an example of which you see on the left here, takes as its inspiration an ancient Chinese text of the same name that dates from before the 2nd century. And that source material comprised a taxonomic classification of flora, fauna, geography, accounts of foreign peoples, herbal medicine, but also as a repository for fables, for mythology, for ghost stories, a kind of compendium of information about the known world at the time. Chu's pages present modern technologies like aircraft carriers, like you see on the left, and genetically modified animals on the right, as though they were mythical creatures in a postmodern bestiary, though all of Chu's seeming impossibilities are actually fully grounded in reality. The choice of woodcut is paramount here. It allows him to maintain a conceptual proximity to the original, evoking its age with a technique that's been practiced in China for centuries, while emulating its style with elegant curving line work set against an unadorned white ground. Taken together, the images present a satirical and smartly humorous take on environmental degradation, social breakdown, and unchecked urbanization in contemporary society. That project also falls within a historical trajectory in which printmaking has been closely connected to social and political efforts. From the distribution of biblical imagery to a largely illiterate population of religious pilgrims, and the cautionary ballads and penny calaveras of José Guadalupe Posada, to the guerrilla screen prints of Atelier Populaire in 1968, prints have long been pressed into moralizing, agitational, or propagandistic roles. The political impulse continues in the contemporary moment, of course, with artists using the democratic reach of editioned projects to send their messages out into the world. The Uruguayan artist Luis Kamnitzer is perhaps best known for his groundbreaking work in the arenas of both conceptual and political art, in many instances through editioned work, which has been a constant for him since the 1950s. We have at MoMA in our files an undated typed signed letter. It's probably from about 1964 when he came to New York, in which he says, quote, "I presume to be a revolutionary artist with a vision for the world and with the mission of implementing that, to eradicate the exploitation of man by man, to implement the equitable distribution of goods and tasks, to achieve a free, just, and classless society. In order for my mission to succeed, I have to try to communicate with the highest possible percentage of the public, something only possible with a great amount of production and a good system of distribution for my product." So he's clearly thinking about edition. And in his philosophy, the benefit of distributing editioned work that could reach many was clear, from dozens of sheets of printed stickers, like we see here on the left, an early mail art exhibition, to intaglios planned in editions of 50 that could reach many sets of eyes rather than potentially just one. In a project currently on view at MoMA, Memorial takes that political impulse and brings it into the present. What Kamnitzer did was to create a series of nearly 200 digital prints, and they're essentially facsimiles of the 2001 Montevideo phone book. But what he did quite surreptitiously and without any kind of announcement on the page was to digitally reinsert the names of about 200 of the desaparecidos, the disappeared, who were victims of the Uruguayan dictatorship. And so in this way, he takes this document, which is kind of a public record, and by reinserting their names, returns them to the public record, puts them back into the history. And I asked him why it made sense for this to be an editioned project. And he said, because this is a public project. It's supposed to be a memorial, the way you might expect thousands of people to see memorial statuary in a public square. So for him, the only way to do that was to make it an edition. For the artist Nicolas Paris, the democratic possibilities of print dovetail with his pedagogical interests, which comprise a range of activities from teaching in a one-room schoolhouse in the Colombian countryside to organizing hands-on educational programs for children at the Venice Biennale. For Paris, a broadly distributable edition is a critical tool that can help people think more openly about the world and the possibilities that are there for them. Twofold is his seminal project to date. It's a flexible, interactive project that's taken many forms, but the most critical is an artist's book. And I'm just going to show you a little 90-second clip of that. So in each of the volume's pages, the simple act of folding over a corner reveals an alternate reality. So you can see with this incredibly simple gesture, a cloud can turn from placid to stormy. The letter D can become the letter B, a complete revolutionary shift with that most simple gesture. I love this little film because it has all of these different hands in it. There are men's hands, women's hands, children's hands. And I think it really speaks to the accessibility of this project, which was made in a large edition and was really inexpensive. And just the way that it suggests all these myriad possibilities that exist in any situation, and the fact that it's on us to try to kind of activate them. I also just love the idea of a movie trailer, but a trailer not for a film, but for a book. Oops, sorry. The artists that I've mentioned so far have all used print techniques to suit their conceptual, thematic, or formal purposes, regardless of whether they see themselves as printmakers or whether others do. While they might employ print in spite of print, there are others who engage in print for the sake of print. Matthew Brannon's artistic output revels in the not yet obsolete charms of letterpress. The look and style of printed retro ephemera, promotional materials, and posters informs his aesthetic, but he's opted to imbue both the form and the content with his own subversive twist. So these cheerful but sometimes misaligned images here, the ballerina, the syringe, and the hanger, are often paired with these carefully composed texts that have this kind of strange quality to them. This one, just an excerpt. Undoing my seatbelt, loosening my tie, leaving the cockpit, pouring myself a drink. These also kind of undermine the ideas of reproduction that are, of course, inherent in printmaking, as they exist solely as unique examples. Small intaglio plates and presses can easily be managed single-handedly, as demonstrated by the entirely self-printed oeuvre of Jose Antonio Suarez Londoño, whose etching practice of more than 30 years continues unabated in Medellin. Londoño works constantly on small plates. He often carries one around with him in his pocket, employing a nearly microscopically fine line in the creation of diaristic images that draw on art history, on archaeology, on music, on literature, on the cosmos, on the lyrics of Patti Smith, and the ballerinas of Degas. They're usually printed in just a few examples, subverting the reproducibility inherent here and selecting it instead for its singular artistic qualities and the artistic vocabulary that it provides. The omnipresence of Photoshop and other digital manipulation softwares and the affordability of high-quality digital printers has given artists first-hand access to tools and materials in their own studios. These kinds of self-directed setups give artists the freedom to work at their own pace, in their own spaces and without the pressures of a workshop staff waiting for deployment or concerns about trying to come up with a commercially viable image. For her major print project, Satin Operator, a series of 13 large-scale digital prints, and by large scale, they're 5 feet tall, so that's my height. There are 13 of them, quite big. The artist Tricia Donnelly coordinated the production of this small edition herself. Tricia's work can be really elusive for those of you that aren't familiar with it. It takes a lot of forms, from a slab of marble or just a snippet of sound to a photograph of a wave or an undocumented performance. But what those things all have in common is that she's merging fact and fiction and asking us as viewers to entertain different possibilities about the overlap and continuum of time and space, asking us to allow for metaphysical ruptures and to accept the unexplained. This is at times very hard to swallow, but in the fall of 2006, she described this experience in which she stared at an image for so long that, in her terms, it, quote, cracked, pixelated in links and shattered, creating a stutter of multiple images connected to the original. In this project, she offers the physical manifestation of that image stutter, creating an object in an edition of 3 that can exist in multiple places at the same time, seeming to defy physics, with imagery that seems to reverberate or shudder through her manipulation. You can see here she's using a found photograph of what looks to me like kind of a Hollywood film noir starlet, rotating it in steps through the 13 plates. And as the back of the figure's head becomes a profile and then turns around in this kind of cinematic way to meet our gaze. You can see that underlying the image is this kind of cylindrical tube. I always imagine it to be made of cardboard, I don't know why, wrapped in bubble wrap. And the support is also kind of stretched and pulled like taffy. And it's this double torquing that creates the visual stutter, that rupture and repeat in time and space that Donnelly has described. I think Satin Operator is perhaps in many ways emblematic of what's happening in printmaking now, as Donnelly embraces digital technologies to manipulate her images, produces work that blurs the distinction between print, photograph, and in this case, installation, and is also self-produced and self-directed. Printmaking in the 21st century is permeated by the kind of porosity that we've talked about today, work that simultaneously relies on and explodes tradition, that welcomes the incursion of other mediums and materials, and adopts traditional techniques into a larger practice to suit formal, technical, or conceptual concerns. We see both this embrace of tradition and an openness to expanding the boundaries, a desire to maintain and acknowledge print specificity and to position it within a larger discussion that will keep printmaking central to contemporary art. Thank you very much.